In addition to these escalating numbers of cyber attacks we're hearing about at the DEF CON security conference that just ended, an 11-year-old was able to hack into a simulation of the Florida state election website in under 10 minutes. What does this say about the security of our elections right now?
Well, one, I would just say that it's wonderful that we're actually highlighting this problem, especially because it's critical to our democracy. But what happened at DEF CON, right, was really a penetration of the website that the state would have up that would have the tally of the tolls of what was happening through the electoral process, and not actually a penetration into the databases that were actually counting the electoral votes or the voter database rolls.
And Alyza, the 2016 elections exposed a whole host of vulnerabilities. But now, a few years out, are we any more secure than we were 2 years ago? And what new tactics are we seeing?
Hi, thanks for having me. In terms of security from 2016 until now, certainly there is more awareness about the problem. Congress allocated $380 million to states to use to shore up their election infrastructure. In terms of the tactics that we're seeing in the lead up to the midterms, much of them highly resemble what we saw in 2016. So, for example, as you mentioned, we've seen phishing attempts on Claire McCaskill and others, using attempts like those that the GRU used in 2016, as well as coordinated campaigns that appear to be happening on Facebook. Facebook recently announced that it removed dozens of accounts that appeared to be engaged in this kind of activity.
General Matthews, despite increasing warnings about these vulnerabilities and proof of cyber attacks, it seems like progress has been very slow. Some states still don't even have voting machines with paper trails that can be audited. Why is this?
Yeah, I think what we're dealing with here is just like what we're dealing with in corporate industry, which is a lot of legacy IT software and hardware. And so if we look at the voter rolls in most states, they're more than 10 years old. And they were definitely not designed to withstand a cyber type of attack. When we look at the voting machines themselves, even though we knew they were vulnerable and they still got implemented, many of them are proprietary. And so we lack transparency into the device itself, we lack transparency into the software independence, and we lack transparency into the quality assurance of that. And so what we have to remind our election officials is that the cyber landscape will continually change. This is not a fix it one time and move on.
So, General Matthews, what exactly would be the technological infrastructure that would protect us from these sort of attacks?
Yeah, so we have to, well, one of the innovative ones that actually came out of West Virginia this year, which is using a technology called blockchain. And what blockchain allows you to do is to have a cryptographic voting process in which the voter's identity is proven through a biometric, their vote is encrypted, and that you can have a public transparent ledger to be able to go back and audit it to make sure that no one tried to influence that particular vote.
And Alyza, over the past year, my team and I have been reporting on what the tech companies are doing to sort of protect themselves from this manipulation. But have they been successfully partnering with DC to make sure that this doesn't happen again, as this requires data and information sharing?
So 2 weeks ago, some of Trump's top intelligence chiefs gathered at the White House to sound the alarm on possibilities for election hacking. Among those was the director of the FBI, and he emphasized the importance of public-private partnerships in terms of solving this problem. But these coming months will be a test case in terms of whether we can effectively secure the social media landscape.
General Matthews, I want to talk to you about what the future of voting might look like. Is voting by mobile app inevitable? And I'm sure that brings a whole host of security issues as well.
Yeah, I'm really excited about this. Being a former military member, being stationed globally throughout the world, and not always being able to vote back home without getting my proxy vote in time in the paperwork. I think that mobile voting by 2020 will be here. I think it gives us great transparency into being able to vote anytime, any place, and it gives us ease. But what we continually struggle with, right, as we move towards convenience against any type of area, is that we generally sacrifice security. And I'm a firm believer this is one area in which we cannot sacrifice that, because it underpins our entire democracy on how we vote.
Alyza, you wrote in your story that suppressing voter turnout is actually a very successful potential tactic. Have we seen this used before, and do we expect this to be implemented in coming elections?
In the lead up to the 2016 elections, there was concern about voter registration rolls, particularly because some states were seeing scans of their voter registration systems, though nothing was ultimately altered, and it's unclear what any upshot of this is. However, if Russia or an adversary wanted to escalate tactics, moving from what we saw in 2016, which was coordinated campaigns on social media, targeted leaks and disclosures, phishing attacks on various candidates, the next step in the escalation ladder, ahead of actually changing tallies, which would be an extreme option, would be to make it more difficult for some people to vote, creating delays, lines, things like that in some polling places, while other voters could vote as normal.
And General Matthews, lastly, how do you think an attacker would be looking at the landscape over the next few years? Is there a possibility that they're saving their most sophisticated tactics for the upcoming presidential elections and we won't see them for the midterms?
Yes, I do believe that. I also believe that we have to look at the system holistically, and it's not just the voter database, but it's also the way the entire chain of custody works, because the voting process is actually fairly simple, right? One eligible voter, one vote kept secret, and then we want to be able to audit it when we want to. And I think what will happen is that we'll see attackers, especially nation states, target swing states and swing counties to be able to influence elections. So the probability of influence a presidential election would be really hard, but doing it at the county or state level against a congressional election, I think would be actually fairly easy if we don't shore up our voting process.